Chapter 25 of Microbiology from OpenStax, which is free to everyone. The circulatory and the lymphatic systems are home to many components of the host immune defenses. Infection of the circulatory system may occur after a break in the skin barrier, or they may enter the bloodstream at the site of a localized infection. Pathogens or toxins in the bloodstream can spread rapidly throughout the body and can provoke systemic and sometimes fatal inflammatory responses, such as SIRS, sepsis, and endocarditis. Infection of the lymphatic system can cause lymphangitis and lymphadenitis. Bacterial infection of the circulatory system are almost always serious. Left untreated, they have a high mortality rate. Bacterial pathogens usually require a breach in the immune defenses to colonize the circulatory system. Most often, this involves a wound or a bite of an arthropod, which is an insect vector. But it can also occur in hospital settings as a result of nosocomial infection. Sepsis from gram-negative and gram-positive bacteria, puerperal fever, rheumatic fever, endocarditis, gas gangrene, osteomyelitis, and toxic shock syndrome are typically a result of an injury or introduction of bacteria by medical or surgical intervention. Tularemia, brucellosis, cat scratch fever, rat bite fever, and bubonic plague are all zoonotic diseases transmitted by biological vectors. Ehrlichiosis, anaplasmosis, endemic and murine typhus, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, Lyme disease, relapsing fever, and trench fever are all transmitted by arthropod vectors. Because the signs and symptoms are so similar to other diagnoses, many bacterial infections of the circulatory system are hard to diagnose. Standard antibiotic therapies are effective for treatment of most bacterial infections of the circulatory system, unless the bacterium is resistant, in which case the synergistic treatment may be required. The systemic immune response to a bacteria, which involves the release of excessive amounts of cytokines, can sometimes be more damaging to the host than the infection itself. Human herpes virus, such as the Epstein-Barr virus, HSV4, and the cytomegalovirus, HSV5, are widely distributed. HSV4 is associated with mononucleosis, Burkitt lymphoma, and HSV5 is associated with serious congenital infections, such as serious diseases in immunocompromised patients. Arboviral diseases such as yellow fever, dengue fever, chikungunya fever are characterized by high fevers, vascular damage that can often be fatal. Ebola virus disease is a highly contagious and often fatal disease spread through contact of body fluids. Although there is a vaccine available for yellow fever, treatment for patients with yellow fever, dengue, chikungunya fever, Ebola are limited to supportive therapies. Patients infected with HIV progress through 3 stages of disease, culminating in AIDS. Antiretroviral therapy, ART, uses various combinations of drugs to suppress viral loads, extending the period of latency and reducing the likelihood of transmission. Vector control and animal reservoir control remains the best defenses against most viruses that cause diseases of the circulatory system. Malaria is a protozoan parasite that remains an important cause of death primarily in the tropics. Several species of the genus Plasmodium are responsible for malaria and are all transmitted by Anopheles mosquitoes, mozzies. Plasmodium infects and destroys human red blood cells, leading to organ damage, anemia, blood vessel necrosis, and death. Malaria can be treated with various antimalarial drugs and prevented through vector control. Toxoplasmosis is a widespread protozoal infection that can cause serious infection in the immunocompromised or developing fetuses. Domestic cats are the definitive host. Babesiosis is generally asymptomatic, an infection of red blood cells that causes malaria-like signs and symptoms in the elderly, asplenic patients, or immunocompromised. Chagas disease is a tropical disease transmitted by triatomine bugs. The trypanosome infects hearts, neural tissues, monocytes, phagocytes, often remaining latent for many years before causing serious and sometimes fatal damage to the digestive system and heart. Leishmaniasis is caused by the protozoan Leishmania. It's transmitted by sandflies. Signs and symptoms are generally mild, but serious cases might cause organ damage, anemia, and loss of immune competence. Schistosomiasis is caused by a fluke, transmitted by snails. The fluke moves throughout the body in the bloodstream and chronically infects various tissues, leading to organ damage. Vasculitis is inflammation of the blood vessels. Capillaries are located in the interstitial spaces within tissues. They release nutrients, immune factors, and oxygen to tissues. Lymphadenitis will result in the formation of buboes. Lymph nodes filter out the most microbes from fluids that accumulate in the body. Relapsing fever is caused by a spirochete. Body lice can transmit epidemic typhus. Gas gangrene is associated with Clostridium perfringens. Yersinia pestis causes the plague. The Epstein-Barr virus HSV-4 is the most widespread in the human population. Mouse urine and feces can spread the hentovirus. A patient with high CD4 cells is likely in stage 1 of HIV. Schistosomiasis is caused by a helminth. Wombat! The most common form of leishmaniasis is cutaneous. The causative agent of malaria is Plasmodium falciparum. Malaria, Chagas disease, and babiosis all involve an arthropod vector. Vasculitis can cause blood to leak from damaged vessels, causing purple spots called petechiae. Lymph re-enters the vascular circulation at the subclavian veins. Lyme disease is characterized by a bullseye rash. Septic shock refers to a loss of blood pressure resulting from a system-wide infection. Burkitt lymphoma is a cancer that forms in patients with HSV-4 and malaria infections. Arboviruses are transmitted by vectors like ticks and mozzies. Infectious mononucleosis is caused by Epstein-Barr virus HSV-4 infection. The Anopheles mozzie is the biological vector for malaria. The kissing bug, assassin beetle, is the biological vector for Chagas disease. Cercarrial dermatitis is also known as swimmer's itch. Chapter 26 of Microbiology from OpenStax, which is free to everyone. The nervous system consists of two subtypes, the CNS and the PNS. The skull and the three meninges layers, the dura mater, arachnoid mater, and the pia mater protect the brain. Tissues of the PNS and CNS are formed of cells called glial cells and neurons. Since the blood-brain barrier excludes most microbes, there is no normal microbiota in the CNS. Some pathogens have specific virulence factors that allow them to breach the blood-brain barrier. Inflammation of the brain or meninges caused by infections is called encephalitis or meningitis. This can lead to blindness, deafness, coma, and death. Bacterial meningitis can be caused by several species of encapsulated bacteria, including Haemophilus influenza, Neisseria meningitidis, Streptococcal pneumoniae, and Streptococcus agalacticae, Group B, strep. H-fluenza affects most young children and neonates. Young adults and children are affected by Neisseria meningitidis. Streptococcus pneumoniae affects mostly young children, and Streptococcus agalactiae affects newborns during or shortly after birth. Signs and symptoms of bacterial meningitis are fever, stiff neck, headache, confusion, convulsions, coma, and death. Diagnosis of bacterial meningitis is made through observing the culture of organisms in CSF. Bacterial meningitis is treated with antibiotics. Haemophilus influenza and Neisseria meningitidis have vaccines. Clostridium species cause neurological damage, including botulism and tetanus, by producing potent neurotoxins that interfere with neurotransmitter release. The PNS is typically affected. Treatment of Clostridium infections is effective only through early diagnosis and administration of antibiotics to control the infection, and antitoxins to neutralize the endotoxin before they enter the cells. Listeria monocytogenes is a foodborne pathogen that can infect the CNS, causing meningitis. The infection can be spread through the placenta to a fetus. Diagnosis is through culture of blood and CSF. Treatment is antibiotics, and there is no vaccine. Hansen's disease is leprosy. It's caused by the intracellular parasite Mycobacterium leprae. Infection causes demyelination of neurons, resulting in decreased sensation of peripheral appendages and body sites. Treatment is with multi-drug antibiotic therapy, and there is no universally recognized vaccine. Viral meningitis is more common and generally less severe than bacterial meningitis. It can result from secondary sequelae of many viruses or be caused by infection of arboviruses. Various types of arboviral encephalitis are contracted in particular geographic locations throughout the world. The mosaic-borne viral infection of the nervous system are typically mild but can become life-threatening. Zika virus is an emerging arboviral infection with generally mild signs and symptoms in most individuals, but infection of pregnant women can cause the birth defect microcephaly. Polio is typically a mild intestinal infection, but can be damaging or fatal if it progresses to a neurological disease. Rabies is nearly always fatal when untreated and remains a significant problem worldwide. Transmissible spongiform encephalopathies such as Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease and Kuru are caused by prions. These diseases are untreatable and ultimately fatal. Similar prion diseases can be found in animals. Neuromycosis are uncommon in immunocompetent people, but the immunocompromised patients with fungal infections have high mortality rates. Treatment of neuromycosis requires prolonged therapy with antifungal drugs at low doses to avoid side effects and overcome the effect of blood-brain barrier. Some protist infections of the nervous system are fatal if not treated, including primary amoebic meningitis, granulomatous amoebic encephalitis, human African trypanosomiasis, and neurotoxoplasmosis. The various forms of amoebic encephalitis caused by the different amoebic infections are usually fatal even with treatment, but they are rare. African trypanosomiasis is a serious but treatable disease endemic to two distinct regions in sub-Saharan Africa, caused by the insect-borne hemoflagellate Trypanosoma brucei. Neurocystocercosis is treated by using anti-helmintic drugs or surgery to remove large cysts from the CNS. The outermost membrane of the meninges is the dura mater. Inflammation of brain tissue is called encephalitis. Nerve cells have long projections called axons. Chemicals called neurotransmitters are stored in neurons and released when the cell is stimulated by a signal. The central nervous system consists of the brain and spinal column. Neisseria meningitidis is known to cause epidemic meningitis at college campuses and dorms. The most common cause of neonatal meningitis is streptococcal agalactiae. Signs and symptoms of infant botulism include difficulty suckling, limp body, and weak cry. Listeriosis has no vaccine. Leprosy is primarily transmitted through nose blowing. Japanese encephalitis does have a vaccine. Kuru is transmitted by eating human brains. The Sabin vaccine mimics the normal route of infection. Typical rabies reservoirs are dogs, bats, and skunks. Cryptococcus results in meningitis caused by an encapsulated yeast. The negative stain is used to visualize the capsule of Cryptococcus. Trypanosoma brucei rhodanese is the causative agent of the East African trypanosomiasis. Naegleria fowleri is the causative agent of amoebic meningoencephalitis. The tsetse fly is the biological vector for the African sleeping virus. Humans usually contract neurocysticercosis by consuming undercooked meat. Neurocysticercosis is the most important cause of adult-onset epilepsy. The cell body of a neuron is called the soma. A signal is transmitted down the axon of a nerve cell. The subarachnoid space is filled with cerebral spinal fluid. The blood-brain barrier prevents access of microbes in the blood from gaining access to the CNS. The meninges are a set of 3 membranes that cover and protect the brain. The form of meningitis that causes epidemics is caused by the pathogen Neisseria meningitidis. The symptoms of tetanus are caused by the neurotoxin tetanospasmin. Hansen's disease is another name for leprosy. Botulism prevents the release of the neurotransmitter acetylcholine. Tetanus is a neurological disease that can be prevented with the DTP vaccine. Tetanus patients exhibit opisthotonus when muscle spasms cause them to arch their backs. The rogue form of the prion protein is PRPSC. Dogs are the most common reservoir for rabies worldwide. Jonas Salk was the scientist who developed the inactivated polio vaccine. Chronic wasting disease is a prion of deer and elk. The rogue form of a prion protein exists primarily in the beta sheet conformation. The capsule is the main virulence factor of the Cryptococcus neoformans. The drug of choice for fungal infection of the nervous system is amphotericin B. The larval forms of a tapeworm are known as cysticerci. Winterbottom sign appears as a swollen lymph node at the back of the neck in early African trypanosomiasis. Western African sleeping virus causes a chronic form of sleeping sickness from the tsetse fly. Trypanosomes can invade the immune response through antigenic variation. This was read by me, so I can understand microbiology. Thank you.